identities of these sorts get engaged in politics in roughly two kinds of ways. One reason is that the norms of identification that constitute them, the things that people of that identity are supposed to do, give them shared goals which they can use the state to advance. It's not surprising when women act together in political life, since their options are shaped by the sexism of public institutions. It's not surprising that black people act together in societies that are marked by anti-black racism, or that gay people do so in societies permeated by homophobia. The connection between identity and politics here is constituted by norms of identification. It's, as it were, internal to the identity. But people act together on the basis of identities for purely strategic reasons as well. Democratic politics requires the formation of large-scale coalitions of people who don't know each other. We have to act together, even though we are strangers. At a minimum, these coalitions are required in the pursuit of the extensive range of resources, both symbolic and material, that modern states distribute and channel. This strategic function is of particular importance in contexts of scarcity, where working with some and against others is the only way to acquire resources. It's not surprising that ethnic and religious identities rose in prominence in the Balkans just as the Yugoslav economy collapsed. Connections like these between identity and politics are, in an obvious way, external. The identity is there waiting, so to speak, to be mobilized, but in pursuit of goals that have nothing in particular to do with the identity of the norms, and the identity and its norms. When people organized as Serbs or as Croats in the Balkans, it wasn't because they were pursuing goals that were distinctively Serbian or Croatian. It was because they were trying to recover resources in a very resource-reduced environment, and they were getting together on the basis of whatever identities they could in order to pursue those resources.
The AIDS crisis began officially in June 1981. It was at that time called GRID, Gay-Related Immunodeficiency, or gay cancer. And it was 1 year later, in June 1982, that it got the name AIDS. And at first, indeed, America was upset by AIDS at first. In fact, people with AIDS were vilified. They were treated as pariahs. They weren't getting the health care or the other services they needed. And so people who were directly affected by the disease had to create those services themselves. And that led to the creation of the Gay Men's Health Crisis in New York, for instance, and Shanti Project in San Francisco, which provided basic services, getting people on Social Security and the like. And also organizations like God's Love, We Deliver, which fed people with AIDS. But from the very beginning, it was clear that what was needed was a political response, that what was happening was the government was failing people with AIDS, and we needed to do something about it. But it wasn't until March 1987 that that political response occurred. On March 10th, 1987, Larry Kramer at the what was then called the Gay and Lesbian Community Center gave a speech in which he called for an organization to do direct action to change the way the government dealt with the AIDS crisis. 2 days later, 300 people met at the community center and created that organization.
So let me tell you a little bit about where I started from and how I got here. So obviously I'm Jewish. I was born in 1958, which is 13 years after the end of the Holocaust. It's not very much. My grandparents were Eastern European refugees. My grandmother had 2 brothers and 2 sisters who were exterminated in the Holocaust, and my grandfather's sister was murdered at Baba Yar. My father's family were literally illiterate peasants who were literally starving and literally did not have shoes. His adopted sister hid in a fireplace and watched her mother and brother be murdered by Cossacks. So as you can see, I'm very typical of a certain Jewish generation in that I came from trauma, blood, and dislocation. Now, as the oldest female, I can say that from the day I was born, I knew about the Holocaust. Nothing was ever hidden from me in our family. I think the philosophy was if it could happen to children, children should know about it. So I was given the Diary of Anne Frank when I was 6 years old, which I think helped inspire me to become a writer.
In a July 2009 op-ed in the New York Times, one written in response to President Obama's signing of a nuclear arms reduction agreement with Russia, the fashion designer Issey Miyake came out publicly as a survivor of the Hiroshima bombing. Over 60 years after the event, Miyake's statement underscores the fixation on the twinned images of traumatized victimhood and universal humanity that framed and fixed that event. Miyake writes, quote, "I never tried to be defined by my past. I did not want to be labeled the designer who survived the atomic bomb, and therefore I have always avoided questions about Hiroshima, of what humans do to one another out of hatred," end quote. However, this simultaneous extension of victimhood and humanity to Japan, as well as the country's subsequent and instantaneous transformation from enemy into friend, through the exigencies of Cold War politics and the containment of communism, has produced at best an uneven history of the human reparations and post-war justice in the Trans-Pacific. In the US, this transformation served to produce good Asian capitalist subjects as one bulwark against communism, laying the ideological foundation for the emergence of the Asian American model minority. At the same time, it emboldened Americans of Japanese ancestry to demand reparations for internment during World War II. This civil, not human rights initiative resulted in the successful 1988 Civil Liberties Act, whereby the US Congress and President apologized for internment, offering each surviving internee $20,000 in compensation. Simultaneously, it inscribed the US nation state as the site of racial redress, agency, and freedom for the fledgling Asian and Asian American citizen subject.